festival event.
Well, there you go.
All right. So good evening, everyone. It is currently almost 7:05 on Tuesday, the 16th of February. We are recording this event in case any of you don't realize. But if you want to hide your faces or run away, please do so now. The event I think we're about to do is a discussion on red teaming and how we applied it at the festival. Just a couple of important points to start with. This is the Agile20Reflect Festival, in case any of you are in the wrong place. We are a rather large festival. We're open for the whole month of February. We are open for donations as well. We have been a free festival. We're going to talk about money later. But if any of you feel like contributing to helping us with Zoom licenses, stuff like that, please do so. The key thing, this event and every other event, is adhering to our code of conduct. Code of conduct is on our website, and we'd advise everyone, please do have a look. If you see or hear anything that's not within our code of conduct, please welcome. There's contact details and all sorts on there. Our approach to inclusivity, diversity, and creating a space where people can express themselves is paramount above everything else. And I think the code of conduct reflects that. Craig, would you roll on, please, with the slide? And again, so just final thing, we're here till the end of February. There is so much going on. We'll be very grateful if you guys had a look at the festival. Please come to all these events. I'm pretty much booked out every day attending events, and I'm not going to plug my own because I don't want anyone turning up to it. Right, so next one. Please, Craig, let's go. So let's start with this. As you can see, none of us are wearing capes. And not wearing capes is important because red teaming is a day-to-day activity. In the festival, we have had a red team from day one. The founder had asked for it. I'll talk about that later, but it was part of initially the risk investigation circle. And once I looked at the landscape and how we were set up, I named this as the Heretics from Red Team Country. I'm hoping you're going to see why as we go through the talk today. Okay, so people normally think of red teams like this. So this is a logo from a security red team. This is exactly what we're supposed to be in most things. But this is not really what red teaming is. This is a particular branch of red teaming security. I've seen a lot of people say, do you wear helmets? And Craig has a picture of the helmets we're supposed to be wearing. We don't wear these helmets. Honestly, this is not us. We're also not evil swine like most people say. We're really quite gentle people. I'm going to introduce the four of us who are in the red team. And I think let me start with the person who's rolling the slides. It's Craig, as you know, so Craig Coburn. He's an advisor. Craig's down there at the bottom. He's also a speaker. He's also a member of the red team. The person with the amazing shirt is Richard Cornelius. He's also an advisor, speaker, member of the red team. Carl, who's wearing his Christmas jumper for some reason, with no idea why.
It's the only red thing I've got, okay.
And Carl is the CTO of the Agile20Reflect Festival. He's also a trustee. I'm Yusuf Dean. I'm a co-leader of the festival with Scott and Grace. I'm also a trustee and a member of the red team. So this evening is going to be split into three main parts for talking. Sorry, we'll try not to bore you. The first bit's going to be Craig talking about the history of red teaming. The second bit's going to be Richard talking about how we actually used it in the festival. The third bit's me going to be doing a bit of a wrap up, plus talking about how we presented the results and what the response was when they came back. Then Carl will lead us on a general discussion, and if we'll take some questions, and we're also going to be trying to do a live red teaming exercise with you guys, either based on suggestions or if it looks quite raw, because we're going to find a very bland and neutral thing to do. Okay, so questions as you go along after each section is fine. I'll hand over to Craig and he can take over from here.
Hi, thanks, Yusuf. So just a bit of a quick history here. There's a few details there on the screen, but as you can see, the concept behind red teaming actually goes back quite a long way. In the 16th century, Pope Sixtus V, I will say that very carefully. This is at the same time as also the rise of the Protestant movement, but the Catholic Church also had its own Reformation at the same time. And what they noticed is that there was a rise in people asking for sainthood and so on. And this was costing them a lot of money, and it was a lot of bureaucracy, and there was just saints' days popping up all over the place. And so they set up the Office of the Devil's Advocate, which you may have heard of, but it is in fact a real thing that still exists to this day and was used very recently as in the process of canonizing Mother Teresa. And this Office of the Devil's Advocate was to oppose the kind of effectively the word of God, which was the case for somebody becoming a saint. And in challenging it by looking at reasons for why somebody shouldn't be made a saint, they were employing things like scientific thinking to try and explain miracles and trying to put a proper scientific basis on the case to oppose it constructively in order to then stop the ongoing increase in applications for sainthood. Now, in doing so, you'd think this would perhaps increase bureaucracy, but what then happened is that the local churches then realized that this was no free ride, and then the applications for sainthood went down. So rather than increasing bureaucracy, they imposed this constructive challenge technique, which actually isn't a million miles away from the process that we see in courts to this day, in which two opposing sides challenge one another, probe and test the evidence to make it more robust, so that the neutral judge can form a view by the robust testing of evidence from different perspectives. Later on, we see the Prussian Wars, a technique called Kriegsspiel, or Kriegsspiele plural. This was used in the Prussian Wars from the 1790s onwards. And at this particular point, the Prussians, the color Prussian blue, they fought in blue, and they were opposing the Napoleonic army, and they fought in red. And to devise better military tactics, Kriegsspiel was the process of, on a tabletop, setting out a board and simulating with a map on that board how the players might move in a war type situation. So it is a form of wargaming. Kriegsspiel actually means war game, but within English we use it to mean this particular format used by the Prussians. And what they did is they created a team within the army that simulated being the Napoleonic side. And the Napoleonic side fought in red. So this is where the concept of red teaming originates. It's the process of setting up kind of an opposing idea or opposing team to make your thinking more robust as a constructive challenge. Later on, through the military development of this, we did see a rise in the use of red teaming practices. Within 24 hours after the September 2001 attacks, the CIA Red Cell was reactivated, and they used these sorts of practices. And later on as well, after the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, what the US military in particular realized that it didn't actually learn from mistakes, is that it would go in with no real plan for how things would pan out, and especially withdrawal and what would then happen afterwards. So they really looked hard as to say, how did these things go wrong, especially after we pulled out? So they then looked at the root causes for these mistakes. And this led to a rise in red team practices, especially in the US military, but it's been used well beyond the US in many countries. The concept of red teaming may be just temporary for a situation, looking at it to support decision making, or they may well be long lasting as well. There are different options there, and there is a wide range of red teaming practices. A bit like Agile, it is a library of different practices to counter groupthink, to broaden your knowledge of the landscape, and to bring about a broader perspective, so you don't converge prematurely on one solution, or you don't fall victim to different biases that may be just part of human psychology. So really, like Agile, it requires a bit of a shift in mindset, and in particular, a willingness to accept what's discovered. Otherwise, what's the point, really? It's really about structured and deliberate constructive challenge to help decision making. So it's not that the red team tells you what to do, but it gives you a better informed view so that you make the right decision based on a broader and more, I suppose, nuanced analysis of the landscape rather than just converging on things that worked before or biases. So this is the essence of red teaming, a bit of history, and it's now becoming more and more prevalent, I think, within agile spheres in particular, because two things happen. One is we want to embrace diverse thinking in agile, and the other thing is we learned that psychological safety is a big thing. Google discovered that, but often it's all very well to say psychological safety is important, but what happens with red teaming is the red team comes in with what we call top cover. Management supports them. Their job is to challenge. Therefore, the red team has that psychological safety support. And by both doing this and challenging, they are demonstrating that challenge works and being the role model for the rest of the organization to bring about a shift in the rest of the organization being more prepared to challenge constructively themselves. So they're not only informing decision-making directly, but they're also being the role model for culture change too.
Wonderful. So Craig, can you stop sharing your screen, please? And I'll share mine. Okay, so when we went to actually look at this, the first things we did actually was, it's a lovely blank screen there, isn't it? We used good practice. We met together. We had our cameras on so we could see each other, and we set a cadence up every week we would meet. So that was the first thing. We kept our own psychological safety, and the second thing was we kept it visual. And so this is a Miro board, and let me zoom right in there for you. So this is one of the ones that we did, and it's called Impact of Money and Control. So we started off with the reason why we were red teaming something. As a team, we deemed that this was an important item. So the Agile20Reflect, right, so it was being offered lots of sponsorship money, which sounds absolutely fantastic. You know, the noise around is absolutely great. People know that we're doing a really great thing. However, with something like that coming in, we also need to ensure that the Agile20Reflect as an organization can stay safe. So basically, so if the Agile20Reflect accepted sponsorship money without any controls, is there a hidden agenda, right? And what could that mean to the festival as a whole? So we always start to look back at what we're looking at. And that's one of the hardest things with red teaming, I found. If you don't have the viewpoint of trying to be destructive, you will come up with the answer to do something constructive. And there's plenty of other people doing things in the constructive way, right? And there was times we would all sit around and we'd say, actually, that's all wrong, that's all wrong, that's all wrong. We need to be doing this, we need to be doing the other. And we had to pull ourselves back because we are producing recommendations, not solutions. So, that's why I covered that one. Basically, one of the things was we obviously put a date against it, so we had a tally. Right. So, having said what we were red teaming, we then decided how were we going to red team? And we took a number of routes from this, but two of the main routes were, if I was wanting to break the event, I would do. So if you were an external organization or an external person, how would you break it? How would you force the event not to occur? And then the other one was, if I wanted to manipulate the event and use it for my own purposes. And so some of this is a little bit more of people being inside. But again, you can be an outsider person manipulating things. And there was another one down here. We just wrote money, but actually, if you notice, we didn't actually add anything to that, which is very interesting. Because it didn't actually, well, it was nothing destructive about it. So if I wanted to break the event, we then started brainstorming. So as you can see here, things such as being able to criticize to deflect the attention, right? And if money's on the table, then part of that criticism would be asking hard questions about where that money has been spent or will be spent. And at the same time, if any money hasn't been spent, criticize, because it's supposed to be a sponsorship giving. And even if you decided that you were going to hand any money left over to charity, again, you could break the event by causing that deflection of attention by actually saying that not all that the charity isn't a suitable charity, because this is a global event. So what is a good charity for one country or one continent is not a good charity for another. It's always going to be conflicts around the place. Here's an interesting one. Actually go at the organizers themselves. Discredit the organizers. You know, actually say that if you're taking money in, then actually you're only doing it for your own profit. So as you can see, lots of these things are being very negative against the money. I'll come back to Trojan Horse in a minute. Part of the event principles are that it was going to be a free event for everybody. And it's going to be an event by the people and for the people. So at the moment, this is breaking it. Does that impact by the people, for the people? Not necessarily, right? Does it impact the free stuff? Not necessarily. However, a Trojan horse is an interesting one, because people would come in, run their own events, call it that it was an Agile20Reflect kind of thing, and get sponsorship money from it, and then actually start saying that this was an Agile20 money. So it's an underhand way, and at which point, you know, the event looks bad. But let's have a look at the second lot. If I was wanting to manipulate and use the event for my own purpose, these kind of things are far more impactful about having it to be an event of the people and for the people. So using sponsorship as a method of control. In other words, we have given you Agile20Reflect X amount sums of money. Therefore, we ought to have a top billing. Therefore, we ought to be advertised. We ought to be promoted. There's the ability to hijack data. Any information that comes from this, if they are able to control what's going on, they're able to ask questions in a certain manner. And if you ask questions in a certain manner, you get answers in a certain manner. And at which kind of point you start controlling the state of Agile. There's a very interesting one I remember somewhere else as well. Here at the bottom, yes. So use my size to give more than other companies can by themselves. So by having sponsorship, it would favor the established companies. It would favor strongly the established companies that were large, and all the new and emergent companies would actually be negatively biased against them. That is an antithesis of what we're trying to do with the event of by the people and for the people. So as you can see, it's getting quite a spider graph here. The last one here, we had about emotive issues. Again, we didn't really explore that. And then we kept some follow-up notes. And Yusuf's going to be talking about what happened after we'd actually finished the red teaming. And I've purposely obscured those because they are personal notes and information about why and what happened. But I'm sure Yusuf will be able to talk around these kind of things, so you'll get a flavor of it. So again, it's just start from the central question. Think about what you are trying to do. I mean, in this one, we didn't do a pre-mortem. Some of the examples we've got you for later, we've got things such as a pre-mortem in there as well. And then you just literally brainstorm out from it. And back to the slide deck, please, Craig.
Okay, so while Craig's doing that, let me summarize what Richard's described. He's actually, if you think about what he's describing, it's two main approaches that he's got there. One is we're gonna try and break you, and the other one is we're gonna pretend we're working with you, but we're gonna try and do something for our own advantage inside of it. So these two are classic techniques that come from one of the sides that Craig talked about. Craig was very kind. He's actually an accredited Red Team thinking coach. He's working with a couple of the big organizations at the moment. There's two main strands of Red Team thinking. One is a military approach. One's more of a business orientated approach. If you flip on to the next slide, please, Craig. So effectively what we did was we looked at the range of practices that we had. And from our range of practices, what we thought was, in here, given the sort of things we're looking at, the pre-mortem, some of those things are fine. We can use them when we want. But really what we were looking at was this. We wanted to do diagnostics. We wanted to do challenge activities that were going on. And we wanted to have some creative thinking. These are normally the three phases of any Red Team approach that you might look at. Given that the time constraints we had and we were all volunteers, we looked at, if you look at it, the two things we actually did was exactly the two things in the middle that overlap. And that's wargaming and alternative future analysis, okay? And the alternative future analysis came from opponent analysis. What would the opponent think? And the wargaming came from both inside and outside. So the money one was, if I just go back to that, that was a really interesting one. Because in money, it wasn't just that we had the ability to manipulate, but we had the abilities for organizations to control where we were going, to subsume us into what they were doing, to stop the number of events. There was all sorts of things which were propagating off that. It all still revolved, and all that information came out from Red Team sessions around wargaming and alternative futures. Okay, that was the summary. So the takeaway for you guys always, if you want to do this yourselves, we're gonna put some free resourcing up at the end. But it's these three phases that you need to think about: diagnostic analysis, creative thinking, and challenge activities. And all the different open source practices are here. And Craig will talk about some of the other ones later as well. Now, the flip side of that is this: that there's in red teaming, in the way we work, normally you're commissioned by people to actually go away and do this. Okay, and as Craig said, you can either have long-standing teams or you can have teams which come together, form, and dissolve. Now, there's, just to summarize quickly, there's three key elements to a red team. One is a red team itself, which is a function which covers all of these activities. One's a red cell, which Craig's mentioned, the CIA stood up. The red cell specifically looks only from their enemy's point of view at destructive behaviors, purely destructive, okay? And the third element normally you have is a white cell. Now the white cell will actually try and feed information into the red cell or into the red team to get them up to a level where they can actually provide effective challenge. For us as a red team, we had all three collapsed into one. We were both a white cell, a red cell, and a red team ourselves, okay? Now, what that meant was that any reports that we pushed out were going to be controversial, okay? Normally, when you push reports out, they come into these three formats. I've written it on the right. You normally will definitely give verbal briefings back, supported by a presentation. Always, verbal briefings are important, okay? You normally have to produce some sort of written documentation somewhere where people can see what you recommended, and you should actually have team interaction with the end users. So, for example, if your head of finance has said, "I've got a problem in terms of taking money from X, Y, and Z," that's not just for them, but it's also for your reports and your interactions have to be with the people who are going to be using that money. So it's those 3 levels, okay? If you flip on, please, to the next slide, Craig. So background for us, let me just go through quickly how, and this is all giving you insight for how you might set this up yourselves if you want to do this. So the founder for the festival, Scott said, right, he wanted a red team capability from day one. The other trustees were curious, and I'll say honestly, they were all, no one resisted, but they were all like, well, isn't that just risk? Isn't that just this? Isn't that just that? So the first job of a red team is to look at the landscape that you're in and to make sure that whatever activity you're doing is going to be noticed. You can't go undercover. That's not the thing. So we deliberately set this up with a provocative name. We were the Heretics from Red Team Country. Immediately we had people going, Craig was asking why we called Heretics. Carl joined the Red Team because we were called Heretics. We had people saying, what does that mean? So this is absolutely essential, okay? So the first insight that I would take away is start with the red team mentality, look at your landscape and provoke from day one. Make sure that you're going to get attention. Okay. Sorry, Craig, I'm using you as a slide monkey.
Shall I put in there just to say about why I joined? I mean, the notion of a heretic is the crazy person in the street who is usually right. I just you know, coming from enterprise systems and organizations that live their lives with rose-tinted glasses, and in the last few weeks of any major project discover things don't work, I personally preferred the concept of red teaming, essentially to ensure that all of the potentials are on the table. Even if they were never acted upon, they were known. And I think that's what really excited me about it. And I got to play both ends of the game as well, because I was in the red team and I'm a trustee. So I'm involved in making decisions as well. And I had to be somewhat circumspect about having that prior knowledge. So I let Yusuf lead, and he consequently gained so much notoriety and value from it that he will be able to explain later. But it was really important to be able to have that distancing so that I could also interrogate him in the trustee level.
So I mean, Carl's absolutely right. The acceptance. We'll talk about it in a moment. But the first thing Carl said was really interesting. The range of problems. So this is something that I'd like to discuss just quickly as an insight for you guys. There's a battle of the problems that trustees, your managers, your board of directors, product owners, whoever it is, your architects, whoever's out there, is going to give you a list of backlog of problems, okay? And they're going to say to you, please can you examine this, please can you examine that, please can you examine the other. Now, in that range of problems they're going to give you, they're going to put high value on some and low value on the others. The first principle to establish yourselves as a red team is to say to them, okay, either are we going to just accept stuff from the top, we're going to pull it, or are we going to, as a red team, look at the problems and say, we think this one's valuable. And there's definitive practices that Craig will talk about in a bit about his from the red team thinking, but where you actually say, if we did this, what would we be looking at? So that's an absolute thing where you look at all the problems that are there and you decide as a red team, as an insight, what are you going to pick? For us, what we said to what I said to the trustees, I'll take the blame for this. I said to the trustees, as a trustee and as a co-lead, look, guys, I mean, I'm going to, when I put my red team hat on, I'm going to say to you guys that we're not picking that problem. We're going to look at that problem. And if you complain, tough, to go find yourselves another red team. And it was that red team mentality, and they accepted. They realized that they allowed us the freedom to think about that. And I'm grateful to the trustees for doing that. So we accepted the backlog of problems, but we said we were going to pick the ones we wanted to look at. The returning our conclusions, again, I followed the classic principles. That was done through written submissions. It was done through one-to-one briefing to the trustees, and it was working with the end teams and everything. So the insight is both there. Authority. You've got to establish the level of authority that you want. It's either going to be, we'll just accept whatever comes in, or we're going to accept certain things only. And you've got to make sure that there's multi-channel bombardment back to get the hard messages across. So that's the second key insight from how you interact and how you work, okay? And if there's any questions at any point, please do ask. Craig, carry on, please, Steve. All right, so one of the things you're going to find if you try and set your own red team capability up is there's going to be interesting reactions. Okay. Now, a key. I'm gonna just. I'll talk about the specific reactions in a moment, but I'm going to talk about the balance of reactions. Craig made a great point yesterday about if there's groupthink. Craig, do you remember the groupthink point you made yesterday? Do you want to just explain it?
Yeah, well, what we sometimes see in organizations is just everybody just wanted to agree with the chief executive, and the board is just, a group of yes men or yes people. And it's just like, well, if everybody thinks the same, then perhaps somebody's not thinking. They're just choosing to agree because it's either the easiest or they're perhaps worried that the position might be questioned or they might be replaced by someone else. There isn't that psychological safety. And so it's just easier to say yes. And sometimes, we've seen failures of businesses in the past where the chief executive ploughed on with a strategy. It turned out to be the wrong strategy. And there wasn't that compelling voice saying, let's stop and think and consider what could happen if this doesn't work out. And history shows that when organizations fail, it's perhaps because they didn't adequately consider other options or didn't adequately consider the risk posed to them by other players in their industry. Like of Kodak and Blockbuster, they just assumed the same commercial model would just keep on working without broadening their thinking to say, there's actually a risk here and we need to take that into account properly. Rather than just everybody agreeing and ploughing on with the same thing.
Can I give an example there?
I
did a piece of research with a very well-known multi-billion-dollar business, and it came back and it was 100% thumbs up. And I'm going, that's impossible. I had to sit down with the CEO and explain that there's no way that this research should deliver that results because it was designed to find things out, not to form agreements. And so by having a fully agreed 100% everyone likes what we're doing, we failed. And we had to actually throw away $100,000 worth of research and do it again. And we found out what it was a bunch of people that liked the CEO, as Craig has said, and wanted to please him. And actually, they had doctored the results. I think they were aghast that we were willing to throw it away and start again, but it was a critical path for the organization. And the CEO needs the truth to be able to act, not opinions that follow future agendas for a personal career.
So here's a thank you, Carl, thank you, Craig. So here's a flag for you guys. So the formation of a red team at the initial outset, that's one of the key flags. As soon as you see a bunch of everyone's agreeing, this is the way we go. Okay, even if you don't set a specific red team up, at some point someone should stand up and say, well, if we're all agreeing, then something's not right here. All right, and we need to challenge it. And so this is one of the formations for a red team. But I'd like to take you guys a slightly. So let's say
I think just to add to that, just as we recognise diversity in boards, because it brings different backgrounds, whether it's more women on the boards or from different backgrounds, it's actually just as important for red team to be diverse in their thinking, because you wouldn't just want the red team to just all come up with the same opinion, because then you just have a red team of one in effect. So the more diverse the red team is, the more likely it is to uncover the different options and pathways. And of course, a lot of this is an Agile conference. Now in Agile, we're always talking about, being Agile and reacting to things, and that's all very well. But a lot of this thinking from the military comes about because you only get one chance to get it right. And this is the sort of thinking that you need if you genuinely believe you only have really one chance to get it right. It's proper thinking first, because making the wrong move is effectively too late.
So if we make a note of that, let's come back to time cycles within the military, because one of the key developments the military have done is a change from mission command to mission intent. In terms of reducing that time cycle, so that if you have red teaming and other activities, you can change much quicker. So we can cover that in a moment. But let me just take the unanimity idea a slightly different way. So let's imagine that you have got a unanimity of consensus, and the CEO and your board say, let's go in this direction. You red team it, you take it back, and everybody says, that's fantastic, that's what we should do now. You still have a problem. That's another red team flag, okay? So your response to the red team should also be balanced across from, let's ignore them, what are you talking about, we don't need your help, what is this? That's really good. So the response itself, if your red teaming comes back and everyone agrees, your analysis isn't deep enough, okay? That's a standard thing that we've seen. I've seen this many, many times where you've gone back and gone, actually throw out your £5 million development, let's hire ThoughtWorks, they'll do the job for us. Everyone's gone, that's a fantastic idea. They obviously means you haven't thought it through, all right? So to both sides of this equation, one side, if everyone's agreeing at the beginning, you need some sort of red team challenge capability. If the red team goes back and everyone's still agreeing, then you need to go back and ask yourselves, is the red team really thinking properly? And that goes to Craig's point and Carl's point. Is the red team diverse enough to have all those sorts of things, okay? Let's jump on, please, Craig, sorry. All right, so two key other insights that you guys, and I'm going to just read them out for you, and just, this has actually happened for the festival. So the more challenging the situation being examined, the less pushback we have. And for the more seemingly obvious situations, there'd be swearing, tantrums, hostility. I was called, seriously, some of the things I was called was not very nice. And I was also say, some of the entrenched positions was for seemingly obvious positions. Okay, so can everyone get what the insight is on that? Why that might be? Okay.
So sorry, Yusuf. Hi, it's Shelby.
Hey, Shelby.
Given that you know, we are, as change agents, we are the hardest people to change. Given that you are trying to change somebody's way of thinking from your red team, in effect, of course they're going to be throwing tantrums, because we are telling them that they have to change, and we become, you know, our biases go up and our default modes go up, because we are like, well, how dare you tell me what I need to do or say? And that's why I think the tantrums and the swearing and hostility comes from.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely some of that. I mean, and I'm not going to say I didn't provoke some of it sometimes, to be honest. But there's another way, because this also happens with non-change agents. This is also the same with, if I go to, I mean, and I've done this with the military, and I've done this with consulting organizations. I've sat with boards of directors. There's an interesting way here, interesting thing here. If it's a seemingly obvious situation, people don't really think about it that in depth. They look at it and they go, oh, well, that's obvious. We're just gonna, this is what we should do. So when you challenge it, that challenge then hits a place where they haven't really thought about it. And if it's a really challenging situation, most people go, they know in themselves they haven't really thought about it. So when you explain to them what you've done, they go, actually, that makes sense. They realize themselves they haven't really gone into the depth of analysis you have. This is a key thing. Don't be scared by this, is my insight. Don't be scared by the fact people are shouting at you. What you've got to realize is they've looked at it. They've got a million things to do. They've got all this other stuff going on. They've just gone, okay, we need this. That will solve it. That system will solve it. Or let's put it over there. Or let's do this. Or let's do that. And so when you say to them that's not sensible, they'll become hostile. If it's really challenging, and I'll give you one thing we mentioned, and if we talk about some of the conflict in the late 90s and the early 2000s in Europe. Okay, so this is some of the red teaming that I was working with. Some of the working that we did in terms of funding certain organizations who were doing some interesting military maneuvers and stuff like that. The obvious situation where if someone's, let's say, a resistance movement and you fund them, that's an obvious situation, you fund them, but that's not necessarily the case. You don't just go out and do it. And if you challenge that, you get, well, that's obvious, they're good guys. Okay, but that's not the situation. You always look for these patterns. You always look for a really challenging situation. You won't get much pushback. Obvious situations you will. And this is normally why, because of the depth of analysis. Okay? That's always something to bear in mind if you're setting your own red teams up. All right, let's keep going, please.
Yeah, just to add to that, and of course, if you do get this sort of pushback, what you absolutely have to avoid is to say, well, Yusuf said this, or Richard said that, or Craig said this, right? It is a report from the whole team, and it's non-attributable to individual members. And then that again supports the psychological safety of everybody being free to share, right? It won't come back on individuals. It is a team team analysis, really, and it's presented as a team analysis without individual references to people in it.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take that further, so back to the original points around red team, red cell, white cell, how you set up initially is essential. That's the name that goes in the front report, not an individual, as Craig is saying. Secondly, if you're rotating, as Craig said, the teams through, different people are coming in, then it can't be attributed to an individual to function, okay? All right. Craig, please roll on to the next one. Okay,
just while we move on to that, I'm just going to say I didn't leave Youssef burning in the room. I did ask questions about the context of what he was saying to give it better context for people, because I think there was always that issue about attributing something to people. So I think people are attributing these views to you, and they weren't properly giving the context of the process that brought them.
It's still happening. I mean, even today, views have been attributed to me. Let's put it that way. And it's actually a red team view rather than. So we've had huge conflicts today. This is not something that you can get away from. It's not something you can just go, we can explain it once and it'll happen. This is actually something which is an ongoing process. Okay. All right. So next insight that I'd like you guys to take away, if you're doing this yourselves, if you're going to pick up a red team with the processes, the functions, and the way to do it, then there's always going to be a need to massage and gently coach on the nature of the recommendations, okay? And this is something that I learned from experience and learned painfully. It's not the recommendations themselves that you're coaching, it's the nature of them. Where did they come from? How did they flourish? Where did they grow? How did they grow? How did they become in front of the red team? What did the red team look at them? How do they come back to you? It's almost an ecosystem which is developed around which the red team bit has just dropped in. And so the job when you respond is always to do that whole thing again. The example I always give, the example that was given to me, and the example I always give is always back to military conflict. In military circles, you don't just say some bloke appeared at the top of the hill and he shot all our guys. There's a whole bunch of stuff which has gone on before that. There's a whole bunch of stuff which has gone on in the wider context. The theatre is there, the information is there, the intelligence is there, the equipment is there. All of that happens. That particular moment at which that person appeared and shot everyone is a summation of all the other things. So the red team's thinking shouldn't just be, as a bloke's going to appear on the hill. It should be all of the nature of how that was engendered. Okay, so it's the nature of the recommendations have to gently be massaged, to be massaged and gently coached in. Okay, and again, the second thing is the guys have all emphasized, these aren't decisions that we make. They're suggestions due to considered logical ramifications. They're all suggestions. Okay. The fact that most of them can be very easily converted to recommendations and implementation plans, that's part of the benefit of red teaming. So those three phases of diagnostic, creative, and challenge, the normal red team output for that will be recommendations. So if you're working closer with the people who have asked you to do it. So when you go back to the real world to report back to your stakeholders, the insights always drop the red team mentality. You need to explain this whole thing in context, and you need to still get them to understand everything. You still get challenges, you still get called names, but that's the thing. You're suddenly no longer the enemy, but you're now, okay, look, this is where it's come from, this is how it's growing, this is how it's flourishing. Okay. Okay, that's pretty much all of my bit. We've got a bunch of questions. Should we go through them, guys, or do you want to?
Well, there's a question straight away in the chat, so maybe let's go with that one. I'm not sure what the answer is to this. What percentage of recommendations were listened to? What percentage were considered and led to some change? Which percentage were actually implemented?
Okay, so every recommendation was listened to. The nature of all the recommendations were listened to. Every single one. There's two answers to the considered one. How many do we consider? How many do we take in? We didn't take in as many as we would expect people thought we would. I remember that we had originally had a backlog of maybe 15 or 20 items. We didn't really consider more than 1 or 2 a week at maximum. Most of them weren't valuable enough to do. Okay. How many were actually implemented? Off the top of my head, I'm going to say around half. Around half, I'd say. I don't think that everything was. And I think some things were just dismissed as being silly or trivial. Some things are still in challenge. I mean, what is your guys' impression from, or did you remember as well as I will?
I think that, our sessions are typically about an hour, and that really only covered about one topic. You know, to do this properly, it needs that level of discussion and analysis and thinking. You can't just charge through this because it is a you know, it is about thinking, you know, deeply rather than just trying to rush it through. So that's why we wouldn't get through a lot of challenges, perhaps 1 or 2 a week. But the other thing is that the ones that were actually accepted turned out to be really fundamental and shaped the festival. So I think that it's not about success rate, it's about the impact that you have.
Yeah, I do remember on some of them there was major pushback, but then when it was represented again, it was presented again to say, yes, but this is the impact. This is how it can affect the festival. We're not asking you to follow, to do something specific. Rather, we are actually suggesting what you're already wanting to do, right, is going to cause problems. And it was a change in mentality. So yes, but very impactful, not trying to look at everything, but it had a, like Craig said, it really did shape a number of things, aspects of the festival.
So sitting on both sides and not being on fire the way Yusuf was quite a lot of the time, I saw it impact the mental model, just as Richard's saying, and also the context. So the language was changing because there were more attributes provided. And I think that was really interesting that over a period of a couple of weeks, it took a while to embed. I think that's the thing, is that when you first hear something that's quite controversial, you go, I'm not sure about that, or you defend. And then over a period of time, people started to adopt and think how it related to what they were doing. And so I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was more than 50%, but that maybe that's a subjective note, because I thought that people still allowed it to adapt their thinking, maybe not going along the route of agreeing with any particular one of them, but still allowed it to adapt.
Yeah.
No, sorry, please, Shelby.
No, and you know, being a trustee and being on the opposite side and never having done Red Team, thinking, for me, I still need this conversation to really wrap my head around it. I did see how it enabled us to have greater conversations, especially as we were forming. And if something come up, you know, I knew I could come to you and say, right, I've got this issue around, like, the compliance and setting us up as a charity. What does that look like? Can you go off and scope it out, you know, ask those questions for me, and then come back with whatever you found. And I found that fascinating, that we could have that valuable input from you guys, and it helped us shape and change and be dynamic in the ways that we were thinking. I loved it. I'd like to get more involved. Sorry.
No, so I'll jump one more thing about Shelby. Shelby's a trustee for the organisation, but she was leading the organisational engagement circle. And at one point, and I know she did it because she didn't just need someone to do the legwork, because I didn't really do any. She asked me to help them help out in there, and it was, I suspect it was to bring some of that red team thinking into the org engagement circle. And I mean, Shelby, you can deny this now, but I mean, I think it did help you guys a little bit, I suspect.
Yeah, it did definitely, because we started not looking at them as, we just want an organization because we know that they were that name. So for example, obviously I live in Scrum Alliance world, that's just who I am, but you know, I just didn't want to bring them on because it was the world that I was living in. I wanted to bring them on because of the value and support they could give us. But likewise with PM, you know, was that the same with PMI? And I think that's a question, and we kind of went down, you know, how do we differentiate these? Should we? Are they different? What is it? Where do they come from? Blah, blah, blah. And I suppose as we move forward as a team, we will ask that same kind of questions and use the output for that as well. Yeah, brilliant.
And just one thing that's interesting, this does bring up a linkage. So if we link organizational engagement, which has got the big agile organizations, with sponsorship, and we link it back to Red Team and the trustees, there's a direct linkage there between those different things. One of the things that the Red Team has to do is to have visibility of all these different things in some way. So I'll give you an example. One of the key things was, imagine that one of these organizations at the beginning had said, you know what, well, one of them did say to us, we'll give you like $20,000 straight off the bat. Okay. Immediate reaction was, as soon as we did that money thing, it was, no, we're not doing it. And that then propagated throughout everything. Everywhere we went, Shelby heard this, everyone else heard this, don't do this. it then influenced how we treated the organization, the organization circle, how we promoted events. Did we have keynotes? Did we do all of that? So the visibility of all these things also then propagates through the actions of all the things, okay? So that's another thing we need to think about.
So there's another question here from Maru, which was there a single red team exploring all directions? Was there any rotation with individuals who were initially externals to the red team?
So I'll try and answer that then. But basically, Maru, there was the four of us. It's an event run by volunteers. There was on the risk channel on Slack, there was an awful lot more people, but as we know with when you're volunteering, some people will get involved and some people won't. It would have been good to have more people. It would have been good to have a rotation going around. It would have brought more diversity into the thinking. We were actually almost hoping that some people here would be disruptive, because then actually you're going to get invited to come and join us, you know. But everyone's been quiet and comfortable at the moment.
I thought I was disruptive. I thought that was why I was in.
You're already in, Carl.
Okay, so I'm just going to put something out there as well, just to let you know that red team thinking, although is often used as described, it's also used in counterintelligence as a methods to deal with people attempting things like neurolinguistic programming, because you're meant to have a mindset as someone who's involved with security systems or military. So they actually train you in red teaming in order to be able to spot when you're being manipulated.
And the other side of that is also you get trained in how to manipulate as well, which is it's an evil thing not to. It's quite hard not to do. Can I just say, please, can we open up to more questions? If anybody else wants to ask, please just speak up or post in chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, but Maru has followed up with that. So rather than us read it out, Maru, do you want to say the rest of your intention?
I was just wondering.
You can just unmute.
I was just wondering how red teams. There is no playbook on how to set them. It's evolved a lot over the last 2 centuries in the military mostly, and there's a lot of unknowns about many red teams that we heard about and never know how they worked. So I was wondering how the four of you have functioned and how you interfaced with the others. I'm just wondering how that really worked, because red teaming will cover a lot of ground. It has to. A lot more ground. So it has to stay shallow, it has to be very quick, but it has to bring in the essence of what it finds out, what it identifies as risks, as new directions, back to the people who are going to make the final decision. So I was wondering how you made that work, the four of you.
So let me cover. So I think this is a good point to think about mission intent and mission command, because the key thing from military red teaming is the idea of cycles of engagement. Okay, so the idea is of what duration are you going to actually need to work within. All right, and this is very closely aligned to Agile. So in terms of manuals, in terms of that, a lot of the NATO manuals. I know at the end we're going to post that up. I think the Ministry of Defense manuals in there as well. I've posted. Some of the Dutch Army manuals are there, the US Army manuals are there. They're all listing this out. So the issue becomes that these guys have gone to very specifically in terms of military stuff. Craig will mention the Red Team of Thinking book, and that talks about cycles of engagement in a different way and practices. For us, what we did was literally we took, and I'm going to put my hand up here, we took this idea that we had a 1 week cycle. We had to examine and return the thing within that 1 week. And whatever way we can mash it together, we would do it. The engagement was going to be a report back to the trustees meeting, and it was going to then have to be both verbal and written. And I was going to have to engage with the individual people doing the work. So that was it was literally every week. What do we do? What do we need to produce to get that engagement in a week's time, or the next day, or whenever that week cycle overlapped?
Yeah, it was a week as a sort of time box, but it wasn't necessarily everything took a week. It was something might have emerged just the day before. We would be meeting on the Monday, and then the report would be written on the Tuesday and be done and dusted in a couple of days. Right, so it was that quick. And often, remember, because we're doing this on a voluntary basis, if we were doing this, you know, as a full-time job, we could obviously turn things around perhaps in an afternoon, but a lot of this was constrained simply by our availability in our day jobs. But we were able to turn things around quite quickly. And sometimes we had 2 or 3 things coming up, but we'd say, what is the cycle? What is the thing that actually needs the decision first? Therefore, we will prioritize that.
And I think there's also the practical side on how we actually work together. So this festival is built on respect. It's built on notions of community. That means that, I mean, I'd never met Yusuf before this, and I'd known Craig from what he's written online, but I actually worked with Richard before, and we probably weren't the best of friends. So this has been a good experience to find common ground, but also to find uncommon ground.
Respect for each other. I mean, just one thing, there were times not, sorry, Richard, go on, do you?
No, I just said yes, carry on.
Oh, okay. No, it's exactly as the guys have said in terms of turnaround side, but I remember there were a couple of times, and I can't remember if it was on WhatsApp or if it was on Slack, but we red team stuff on the fly a couple of times, just passing stuff backwards and forwards just to get, because there was a rapid urgent need for something. So there was this regular cadence, but really it was how quick is our time cycle for decision making here? If we were full time, there would at least be 2 different layers. One would be this sort of longer term thing, which is a longer wavelength thing, and one would be a very shorter term. What's going on tomorrow or the next week? That absolutely, and the red team with their commanders in the military, or the red team with their managers in business, will be looking at how you balance these 2 cycles together.
Interesting. Thanks a lot for sharing, guys.
Do we have any other questions?
I mean, Carol touched a little bit on some of the stuff I'd been working on before. Now, I got into red teaming and knowing it by name just over about a year ago. And in the run-up to that, I'd done a couple of conference talks on strategy. And when I saw and talked about strategy and organizational failure and groupthink and so on, I recognized that actually, you know, when somebody said, oh, can you do a workshop on that? And I did a workshop on it. And in that workshop, it was about saying, well, we know these organizations have failed. So now from history, we can look back and say they have failed. What were the preceding steps? That then you would go back and go back and go back and say, like, at some point in the past, there were successful organizations. There were perhaps multiple pathways they could have chosen. They would have preferred a successful strategy, and they ended up in a failed one. Now, perhaps they didn't establish those sensor networks early enough to say, yes, we're on a failure strategy and we should do something about that. But when I started doing that workshop, I was actually doing a thing called pre-mortem. We know it's failed, and we're now working backwards to see the causes of that. So when I was introduced to red teaming, I went, well, this is just an extension of better strategic thinking overall. I'd come up with a visualization practice, but in parallel with that, as I said at the outset, a bit like Agile, there are supporting practices in red team thinking, of which pre-mortem by Dr. Gary Klein is one, and there are others depending on whether you have a plan or not already. You might just be exploring options. And as I touched on at the outset, you know, this originated with wargaming, in which there's 2 opponents with diametrically opposed views. But actually what we're trying to do here is also counter groupthink. And within that, if you open up the options, there may be many views and many options and many possibilities. So in broadening that landscape, of course, there's probably going to be more than 2. So red teaming is about opening up your thinking to say, well, there could be 10 different ways this could go rather than 2. You know, so to try and broaden that thinking to avoid the worst ones and shift towards the more successful ones. So even if the recommendations of the red team are not completely adopted, it might simply have shifted the thinking in a more productive way. So there's lots of different nuances to this, and there's lots of supporting practices. And one of the first things that I noticed is that both in the strategic thinking, the OODA loop, and with Simon Wardley, is start with why. You know, why bother at all? And one of the questions that we should always ask is, you know, what's the problem we're actually trying to solve here? If you were to go around a room of executives to say, you know, is there a problem before us? What is the problem? Just to get alignment on that, you're then at least getting the right thing out in the room to be discussed, rather than everybody having different agendas. And then to focus them on, is this the right problem that the organization wants to solve? So there's a lot of these crossovers I could see between red team thinking and strategic thinking, which actually play into one another to see how the future can unfold in different ways to make that more transparent.
So just to, is it okay if we just explore that point for a second?
No. Yeah, on you go.
So let's just think about that. So what Craig's described is exactly right. This is the red team thinking, the book that's come out. This is the idea that we take a conventional strategy process, or we take a conventional business environment, and in that environment, how do we integrate red team thinking into there in order to affect positive change, in order to counter groupthink, in order to do this? So what's the problem to be solved? What's the strategy? What's the outcomes you're looking for in a gentle way? Most of the practices there in the book, the Red Team Thinking book, are more gentle than the military ones. So when I've read the book recently, I've never read it before. It is actually a lot more appropriate for the business world than the military stuff. Okay, it's definitely there because it's more gentle. It doesn't cause enemies, it doesn't cause breakdowns. But the radical harsh thinking, one of the things I always return to is, if I was doing a startup, which one would I go for? I would pretty much go for the more military approach immediately. And I'll give you an example. One of the things, I don't know if you guys have seen this film. I mentioned this to a friend of mine yesterday, World War Z with Brad Pitt. It's about zombies taking over the world and all this sorts of stuff, and a pandemic breaking out and all this. Anyway, so I was describing one of the military practices called the 10th man, where if 9 people in the room agree, the 10th one has to disagree. And he said, "Oh, you mean like that film where the Israelis, they realized that the zombies were actually zombies because the 10th man said, there's apparently in the film, what happens is there's a report of a zombie coming out in Korea. Everybody says there's no such thing as zombies in Israel. And the 10th man, they've got this function in the military in Israel, says, no, there are zombies. And when they start examining it, they realize there are zombies. So they build their protections so the zombies can't get in. So they're the only country which is protected because of that. So if you can you imagine in the boardroom, if you're that contrary, that you literally had someone there just to say no when everyone else said yes. So this is why I think the modern red team practices that Craig's mentioned, a lot more gentle, a lot more appropriate for business. In certain situations, you need the more military practices which actually really do jolt things. It's that balance that you have to realize and strike, I think.
So I think there's also some interesting military contexts that are not used anywhere else. I went on to a base within a base within a base back in the 90s, and there's this red line all the way around, and I was escorted to a building, and I said, "What's that red line?" He said, "It's a deadline." And I said, "What do you mean it's a deadline?" He said, "If you go across it, you get shot dead." So now I have a proper context for a deadline when I get to set it in work. And I think that these are meanings that we lose as we move between different realms of work context, but essential to understand so that we can then start saying, well, what if? And that's really what I found with red teaming is fascinating, because I certainly from now on will use it with all productization work I do, because I think that I can find products that I wouldn't have otherwise found.
But people also react in a very interesting way. They keep those reactions that you might find, the extreme reactions you might find in the military, even when it's a gentle business situation.
Another thing is also, if you've got a plan, just to go through that and go, right, off this plan, which of this the content are assumptions and which are facts? So you bring out the assumptions, and then the assumptions can then be challenged. But often, assumptions are presented as if they are facts, and then they're not questioned. And you know, even with the world of Agile as a product owner, if you're dealing with your product backlog and you're prioritizing, if you can prioritize based on fact, great. But if it's an assumption, you might go, well, what's the cost of validating that assumption and turning it into a fact through an experiment, right? So as a product owner, you want to know the difference between assumptions and facts to help you prioritize and shape the product and backlog in the least risky way. And the same is true in business. To bring out your assumptions so that you can say, well, actually, I thought that was a fact. It's an assumption. What happens if it's not actually going to be true? And that way you're broadening the landscape of thought to say, well, maybe we should do something to challenge that assumption and turn it into a fact or accept it's a risk.
Can we jump to the Venn diagram slide, Craig, if you've got it, just a few slides back?
Yep.
Please. There's an interesting thing on there. So in here, these three things are exactly that. Key assumptions check at the top in the diagnostic analysis. Okay, so I think at the end of the slide deck, and I don't know how we might do it, but we've got links to where this diagram comes from and a few others like this. But these are standard things. You would, any plan you've got, you'd be mapping the logic, the quality of information. You'd be looking at deception within the plan. Is, for example, a manager doing this to build their own empire, or are they doing this, or have they put money in the system because they want to just build their own empire? Have they hired 400 people? These are all standard things. Key assumptions check. Indicators, all of this is normal. You think about this a lot, but all the red team thinking really does is it puts it in a structured way for you guys.
Yeah, I've already posted once the link to the resources, and I'll post them again so they don't get lost for people. They are in the chat.
Got about 20 minutes left. Do we want to cover more questions and answers, or how do you want to take the last section?
We haven't got enough time to do an exercise now, have we? 20 minutes.
Well, we could play with it. I think people could see it and engage with it, and maybe. So rather than us directing, you tell us, what do you want to do next?
I like the idea of picking a topic and showing us kind of like the dynamic of what you did and how it was done. So if I said, I don't know, pajamas as a word, would you be able to? You know, I'm given that I've never red teamed anything before, I'm not kind of sure how it goes, but is that what they do? Give you a topic, give you a situation that they find themselves in, or is it? Because I can give you a situation, but yes, I'd definitely like to see how you all did it.
Okay, give us a situation, shall we?
Yeah.
Persuading a C-suite executive on why they should have a clear driven outcomes backlog.
Okay. So the question is,
how do you do that persuasive, you know, show them the persuasive value of getting it to be an outcome based rather than an output value backlog?
So the way I would look at that, and sorry guys, I'm just going to jump in. I would look at that as saying the end product of this is going to be an outcomes-based backlog. From the executives, how might they attack that to make sure it doesn't happen? Second one would be, how might they manipulate it to make sure it goes towards what they want, outputs or something? I think about 4 or 5 others, but those two at least we can look at if you guys want to.
And I'd also, though, just caution a little bit there, because you're actually saying what the outcome is you're trying to achieve. You're already started with, you know, we think the executive needs to have a backlog.
Right.
And it's not to prove why to do something, right? It's actually to test whether there's something they're going to do is safe.
So that's the difference then. It's so when you red team it, it's not about telling them what they're doing. It's about showing them an alternative. Yeah. Is that my thinking right?
Yeah. Why don't we do that? Let's just. Richard, have you got the mirror board up? So we can just do it.
I have. I'm going to paste the link into the chat. People can access it. Let me share my screen again as well.
So perhaps another sort of example you could have with an executive team is to say, you know, obviously looking back at some corporate failures because it's gone wrong, is to say, well, we're proposing buying this company. It's maybe a leveraged buyout, or maybe taking on a lot of debt. You know, how might this pan out in different ways depending on unforeseen circumstances like the market's changing, or pandemic, or stock market crash? If we were to do this, what would be the significant factors in the market or external factors, and how could this pan out in different ways so that we see how those options really shape up. And also as we consolidate the companies, what might that future be? So that much more rounded kind of thinking of lots of different options might arise to explore the landscape. We're not really going to have the time to deal with that in 15 minutes, but that's the sort of thinking that might be quite useful for that sort of thing.
That's right.
So, Richard,
if people want to play with this later, they can, because there's another one there on that.
Can I make a suggestion on the title of that one? Let's
Yep.
Really simple. So if you just executives will end up with a clear and detailed outcomes-based battle. Let's just say that's what they're going to end up with. That's the end state we'll start with, yeah? And then we've got those different things we can look at. We can decide which of those spokes we want to pick.
Yeah.
Do you want to share the other options that we looked at before, just to sort of give everybody the other ones that we considered?
We've got time, because
I don't think we've got time.
Well, why don't we take that straight into a pre-mortem?
Yeah.
Let's take that straight into a pre-mortem, because why do we think this is what an executive wants?
Yeah. What I am going to do, I've just unhid them so people can have a play later if they want.
Yeah. I mean, I just looked at the news yesterday and there was the proposal to have AI bosses. I mean, that was a real story on the BBC, and went, how could that possibly go wrong or right? I memean, there's loads of spectrum of options as to the impact of that being considered. So even just by looking at the news, I came up with ideas. So we had 4 boards here, but you're welcome to explore them later.
That's right. So if we're going down the pre-mortem kind of route, right? We're now looking at something has failed, right? The executives don't have a clear and detailed backlog. Why don't they have a clear and detailed backlog? Shout out ideas.
Not have the right skilled people, so staffing.
They've never done Agile before, or any framework in the Agile world environment.
So you can have a backlog without doing Agile. So I'm going to be...
Yeah. No,
if I was to do the pre-mortem and look at what is the ultimate catastrophe that could result from this, and there's been absolute failure, you could say something like, the company's failed because backwards, the clear and detailed backlog was misprioritized by an enemy within, sort of thing. Ooh. And therefore you keep working backwards. So that sort of take the catastrophic end state and then just keep working backwards to the present, because just having a poorly organized backlog, well, it's not really a catastrophe, it's just a problem.
So if you look in the chat, someone's posted something interesting. Can I also say that this is why, so from my point of view, pre-mortem, exactly as Craig just said, immediately leads us to manipulation and destruction. And so for me, I always start with manipulation and destruction first and pre-mortem later. So for example, the backlogs failed because the coach is rubbish. The pre-mortem says the coach is rubbish, let's say. The pre-mortems failed because someone's manipulated it. The pre-mortem, the backlogs failed because someone set up deliberately to destroy it. The pre-mortem, the backlogs failed because someone has actually said, I want an output-based matrix. Yeah. Someone said, I want to maintain my empire. So in that way, the pre-mortem basically lists it, and then we go to the other spokes to then start looking at it in more detail.
Yeah, so actually, in regards to a coaching context or even a consulting context, you wouldn't, we're trying to get them to get their own answers, and by doing it that way and backwards, rather than saying, well, let's get to that, but by doing it backwards, these are the conditions that might occur and what happen as scenarios.
Yes.
Is that right thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of executives rely upon magic that someone else does.
Yeah.
But this is actually exposing what the realities are.
I suppose.
Sorry, one key thing. I'm hoping you guys just see from doing this how much gentler this is than if we went to the one on the right. Can you just show the one on the right quickly, Richard? Let me just imagine if we went to break or manipulate straight away, and we said, how might an executive try and manipulate this situation? Or how might it? And that becomes much more visceral and much more real. Yeah. So this is why there's this balance that if you're doing this, you need to figure out how raw do you want to go and how deeply savage you want to be.
I love this.
So just make an observation here that having worked for several banks, I'm obviously not going to name them, but often in banks, right, there's a lot of emphasis on governance and risk avoidance, with somebody who's quite risk averse saying, ultimately, the worst thing that could happen there is the bank loses its license. Now, of course, that doesn't actually happen, right? Banks haven't lost their licenses, but that threat is in effect the sort of the pre-mortem worst case model, right? So then work backwards for that. Say, well, if we were at risk of losing a license, what would be the preconditions? What would then happen before that? What would then happen before that? Are any of these things happening? So you're kind of working backwards from that worst case and going, none of these preconditions are happening. Therefore, that end state then can't happen because the preconditions haven't yet happened. So then the thing is to look for those preconditions, to say, are we going down this road? Not just present it as if, yeah, if we do this, it'll be complete catastrophe. There will be a number of steps. And then by seeing what those steps, you can take a much more flavored and nuanced approach to risk management, rather than assuming the building's going to go on fire and the bank's going to collapse just because you do one slight wrong thing. There is a number of precondition steps that need to be met. By mapping them out, you get a much more flavored view of the whole landscape to make better decisions in the here and now, rather than taking the same attitude of saying, well, if I cross this road, I'm going to get run over. Well, not if you look properly, you won't.
Well, hang on. There's an even simpler way to look at it. If someone comes along and says building an outcomes-based backlog is going to mean you're going to lose your license, the first question is how.
Yeah.
How are those two things linked?
Yeah.
So I actually ran that scenario with a well-known bank because I had to work at Group and with the Bank of England, because the risk scenario was so massively dangerous, it actually stopped some of the agile work. But we actually did some red teaming at Group.
Yeah. So when you do that, so your first question was, how is this risk going to be able to lead to the license being broken? Is that what it was?
Yeah. So it's about being realistic, rather than just saying the sky's falling. Say, well, why do you think that will happen? Right? Show me your reasoning, and so you see the steps.
So hang on, since we are a red team, we do disagree. So in our sessions, I would actually say, I would challenge Craig on that. I would challenge him exactly, because the whole point is the red team thinking is being contrary. You may not know, you don't know everything. That's the whole reason you red team. And so if someone can't produce the steps why it might lead to the license, that's the point for the red team to go, okay, for us to think about this license might be lost. What might happen to do that? So this is the contrarian thinking, not prove that you're right or prove your thinking, but let's think about the unthinkable. Let's think about those zombies. That's really zombies. That's the point.
I can do that. I think the useful thing is to think like a hacker.
Yeah.
Right.
A hacker doesn't. The hacker sees the door. Everyone sees the door. They see the lock. The hacker sees the hinges and takes the pins out of the hinges and opens the door. Yeah. So it's a different way of thinking.
So, and I suppose when you do this with a team, you start it at the what's the ultimate that could go wrong and work back, because then it will derive so many other questions and so many other layers to that kind of question, and get them to just not justify, maybe that's the wrong word, but just to kind of get them to think of slightly differently around the questionings that they have, or their assumptions about why that the sky might fall down, etc.
No, hold on. So there's two ways to do it. The sky might fall down as one, but that's the left-hand side, the pre-mortem idea. The right-hand side is the sky is going to fall down.
Right.
There's no two ways around it.
Yeah. So you could use it for both. Right. Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. The right-hand side is more putting a malicious mindset on.
Yeah.
How would you, if you were outside the organization or not wanting to make the organization succeed, how would you actively change that?
Oh, yes, because that is ultimately, like, that's what, that is all the worst case scenarios. So if we put that lens on that says, I ultimately want to break you to fix you.
It's a classic executive process to state that what's being done is wrong, and therefore I will ensure that it fails in order to bolster my position and move on my career. It's classic behavior. And that would be breaking. The most common one I've seen, I've actually seen it really happen, is the executives of a major organization ended up outsourcing technology after first trying to get them to do something.
Yeah.
Wow.
So can I say, I've seen in the participants, we've got Neil McKinnon, who's worked with me before. We've worked together. I'm not going to say, hey, Neil, I'm not going to say, you've seen that stuff on the right together. Do you remember the sort of stuff we saw?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment too far on that, but yeah, it wasn't a lot of strategic thinking and all of that.
It was literally trying to break stuff, trying to manipulate stuff. It was literally starting from destruction.
It was a lot of it was just short-term gain, wasn't it? And it's made you.
How
made
open
you
to
look good for a
organize?
short period of time.
How open to organisations are they then to this type of red team thinking? Because I suppose you're going to go in there with that stance that we're going to break you, but we're doing it to fix you, etc. How open are they to let somebody that maybe is an outsider, let's say if you go in from a consultancy perspective or a whatever contracting perspective, would they be willing to open that to you, to let you to do that? Have you found in your careers, and that goes to all of you because I know that you're veterans, do they, are they susceptible to it, or do they actually try to bat you away and go, bugger off, Carl, I'm not allowing you to do that?
They say that's Carl all the time anyway.
Yeah, that's nothing to do with the question, though.
Sorry, Carl.
For me, I'll put it this way: if I've got a good relationship with the client, I can do the stuff on the right. The stuff on the left is normally most people you can do it with. This is much gentler. Doing a pre-mortem, working backwards. If you don't have the problem I find is the gentle stuff. Most of the time is good, but it doesn't really get to all the issues. So you need to bring some mechanism to find how to insert the stuff on the right and without scaring people. And that's the difficult trick.
I love it. Okay, thank you.
But it does also depend on who your clients are. So if you're dealing with resilience and continuity, they're fine with you trying to break things. It depends on who you're talking to.
Like what department you're in.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I get that.
I mean, I'm literally just working on something at the moment around importation of food from the United States. And the client and I are discussing at the moment, potential client, can we do this on the right-hand side, break and manipulate? And it's difficult to persuade them this is an analysis to do.
Amazing. I'm fascinated, totally fascinated. Sorry for asking so many questions.
No, that's fine.
What's the lifetime?
Come and join us.
Things? I mean, it just depends, does it? Would people go back to it again and again, or is it something that you see it sort of thrown away after a few months, or?
It depends on the scenario you've done.
Yeah. It
depends on the scenario, and it also depends on how much of this thinking you can put into. Remember, you're trying to rotate through the team. You're trying to rotate. As a consultant, you can go in and do it, but really, what you want to do is set up a red team thinking function and get people rotating through. Therefore, you're trying to get the client to start thinking and embed this thinking throughout the organization if possible.
Hmm.
Is that it? Any other?
Let's do another exercise. Let's see. Let me give you another situation. I don't know how much time you
We've got 2 minutes, Maru.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Probably not going to work.
No, but I said on this board, if you want to go and play, you can. So we have a few scenarios. We've got an organization setting up a brand new fizzy drink. Who would not like the My Muck brand, and how would they attempt to derail its successful launch? And we've given you a few starter kind of points on that one. We've got one here about working from home. If we continue working permanently from home even after COVID-19, is there negatives to that? And again, we've just given the basic outline for that. And the other one is What about taking orders from an artificial intelligence boss? Yeah, and these are all potentially real life kind of situations. The AI boss one actually came from an article that Carl was just reading. Because Carl likes reading stuff like that.
Yeah.
Taking the fifth.
And we see, when we sort of scoff, that was just in the news, but we do see, for instance, AI being used in recruitment, with the effect that then the models built into the AI then replicated the biases that were in the programmers. So therefore, the AI bot disadvantaged certain groups. So, there are downsides to this.
Guys, can I ask a question? Should we run this again, perhaps? Is there anybody else who might be interested from the participants?
Yeah.
Especially as a workshop, if we pick up like 2 or 3 case studies, we split them among people and we see what they come up with. Let them work through it, and then with some moderators, and then you can come in and share the results.
So should we do that in a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Last week of the festival. Okay.
The festival ends a week on Sunday, but.
Is it really? That's crazy.
It really does. I'm sure it does. We could red team that. But,
wow. It's crazy to think that it's nearly done with. No, well, it's not, but you know what I mean. Yeah, no, I'd love that. I'd love that. I think that's a great give us a chance to actually you guys observe us doing it as a workshop, and then you can guide us. I mean, I would definitely do that. I'm totally fascinated.
Actually, I've always wanted to do. I've followed Craig since about 1.5 years, and Yusuf I met here in the festival. Richard and Carl just met them over the course of the year. I've always wondered if we could do a series of 1 or 2, 3 episodes on strategy in Agile. I've been working a bit on combining OKRs with Wordly maps, just as an exercise, just to see how people can actually do real, small scope, real strategy, or at least tactic modeling for their teams, for their products, etc. And I'd like to brainstorm this with you guys when I have time. But it could be an interesting series, because there is a lot of talk about strategy. It's implicit, but nobody actually knows how to do it.
Yeah,
well, come to my talk on Sunday. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got quite a few strategists on here, and I agree, Maru. Most people don't understand what strategy is. No. So just understanding it won't actually give you the answer, because you then have to persuade your client that they actually don't understand how to run their business.
Exactly, that's why those tools are useful, because you have a dialogue, you have a language, lingua franca to interact with your clients and show them what it means, what you're talking about. I spent 8 years in consulting, in strategy consulting, and I've done all kinds of various strategies, from go-to-markets to competitive ones, to platform choices, to alliance, and all kinds of various strategies. But it's such a broad art, and there is so little method and system to it, that in the small little agile world, I think there is a bit, there is a how can I say, a dead angle there. There is a lot to do there, and I followed some of you, and I know there is the tools there.
I think this will be a fantastic thing to expand further on. Yes. Yeah. I think outside of the festival, because I think we've got enough things already on, but definitely one we don't want to forget. Yeah, it's the issue with strategy that we've been. I'm ex-strat house myself, so one of the key issues we've got is that the strat guys have got tons of people doing all sorts of intelligent crunching, where we're just a bunch of people wearing interesting T-shirts and Christmas jumpers and stuff. So even though our language actually gets results, our background may not, our image may not portray that. So the key is not just the theory we put forward, but how can we prove that we can get results from these people? That's the key thing. Exactly. That's what we're missing. That's what we're missing.
That's why it would be interesting to run a couple of workshops just to see how we can use tools to simulate some of them, because that's what people call strategies are fixed, static, huge one-time analysis full of biases with a lot of dumb data crunching. That's not a strategy. That's what people sell as a strategy, because that's expensive. You can sell that easily. Yeah. But that's not a strategy.
and often if you get like your external consultants in, they basically say, just do this, 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 and this. They don't say, here's a spread of possibilities. This is how this could unfold. Here's the contrary view. It's just basically follow this recipe and you have a cake, right?
Yeah.
The world isn't like that.
No.
Like a strategy. A strategy is a realm, a space of possibilities, and a set of paths that that you have to choose from. Otherwise,
strategy is living as well. It's not a static.
Yeah.
It's not a moment in time. It's a responsive engagement over a period of time that evolves.
by definition.
I'm just looking at your jumper, Carl. When you said,
I'm sorry. You said to wear something red.
I did think
It
it
evolves.
would come past Christmas.
guys, I need
Not
to
in
grab-
my house.
I need to grab some food. Can we? So should we schedule something for back in the next week? Should we try that?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'd love that.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And
Call it a
thank,
day for today?
thank you all for indulging me and all my questions and everybody else that's on the talk. I totally fascinating, really fascinating.
Yeah, these guys are really interesting. I've been following them since I left my job and I had time for meetups.
So
Thank you,
don't
dude.
forget there's a feedback form, or there will be one on the meetup, just to let the festival know that we are valuable and that they should be listening. No, just
Yeah, give us another stick.
it would be useful if you can. If you've got time, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Don't mention our dress sense.
Yeah, but there's no capes.
Okay.
I've put the link to the feedback form in the chat, and we'll put it in Meetup as well, so it's long lasting and it's easier to access.
Yeah, I got all your video links and that as well. I'm gonna jump on those. That's amazing.
Cheers,
Wow.
all.
Okay,
Thank
That's
you.
great.
thanks
you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks
Bye.
everyone. Be great. Bye.